Hi, everyone. Welcome to the new normal. I'm your host, Lisa Davis. Oh, and there's Rebel Rose. Welcome back. And that's Remington. Well, her bottom end anyway. So I have my co-host with me, but I have an even more special co-host. I am. You guys know him, and he is the great and wonderful, wise emperor of Dendao. At din.social. So make sure you go over to join din.social. All you need is a email. You can start a brand new email. You can be somewhat anonymous. You make the choice, but it's a great way to get information, share thoughts and ideas, and also engage in cryptocurrency in a decentralized manner. So we'll have I am talking about, is there a ChYna population myth out there? We'll see right after this. Give us a like and share the video. Jump in the live chat too. Welcome back, Sir Emperor I am. How are you?
I am fantastic. And living the life of an emperor is pretty nice.
Good to know. Good to know. Going around collecting your things.
Yeah, because I have the right to steal your stuff. Absolutely. But I've been busy counting people in China. I got my pencil out here and I got my notepad here, see, and I've been
figured you would use like an abacus.
Oh, well, yeah, but the battery ran out of my abacus.
Oh, of course it did.
Of course it did. Oh, my goodness. How you been, Lisa?
I'm good. I'm good. We had a big week at Nana's in Arkansas. We're prepping for baby chicks to come in. Actually, I have a little bit of an update for everybody. The Postal Service is having some changes. They're counting down days.
Oh, you're breaking up a little bit, or is that me or you?
Up. Go do that. Yeah. No, that was me, of course. Mm-hmm. So go do that. There are some changes happening at the Postal Service. They're also anticipating having some delays in, they said, in the following services: first rate, ground service, priority. I'm pretty sure they listed them all, but
like it.
And so our baby chicks are delayed a couple days, but Mom is anticipating them arriving sometime this week. So
that's kind of scary. So these chicks are in the back of a truck somewhere that have been delayed.
Yeah, but they put an extra one in there for packing, so they're very tightly with each other, and they have body heat with each other, so they should be all right.
Fingers crossed. All right. Wow.
Packing chicks.
Packing chicks. Mm-hmm. Well, hey, well, it's a way to get them. Got to get them to you, so you can have your eggs and have some chicken.
Well, and speaking of, we're talking about population myth. Back in the old days, when America was being founded, when they did the census, they would use the Pony Express and bring that to the post office, and it would be kept in the post office. So we kind of have a little crossover there about how that method was used and where those numbers came from.
It's a topic for a whole nother show. Boy, we could talk for hours on it. But I think we probably both, Lisa, you and I, see, as others, see the Postal Service playing a very big and different role in the near future. And,
I believe so. I believe that's why Trump bought back again the Waldorf Astoria, which was the first post office in America. It was also one of the first banks. And I think that's the direction that we're going, but we'll see.
We'll see. Yeah. Yep. Well, are we ready to learn about my counting people in China and how my count is a little different than the world's count, like the UN and No, I don't know. Well, it's just kind of strange because I've been following this story for a little bit more than a month and digging into it. And then I thought, wow, this would really upset the apple cart, shall we say. What if China's population isn't 1.4 billion, but dramatically lower than that? And the more you dig into that scenario and find out there's other people that are thinking the same way and have valid arguments as to why the population is much lower, you kind of wonder, wow, this is huge. And then if you watch to the end, wow, I'm smiling about this. I don't mean to. It's a very, very dark woo woo segment, like a what if ugly segment, dark,
Okay.
dark segment.
Well,
So anyway, I guess maybe we should get into this whole
okay.
China population myth. So there's our thumbnail for the video today. For those of you who clicked on the video, this is probably what you saw: China population myth. And where did the people go? Or were there ever that many people? Really, is kind of what we're talking about here. Um, I guess most of the people in the chat will probably know this. What's the population of China right now? What does the world tell you? What does China tell you? What does the UN tell you? And Europe, most media tell you. Tell you what? There's about 1.4 billion people.
It's a billion. Okay.
1.4 billion, I think, is the somewhat official count. Now, some are a little different than others, but let's take a look. So when we see China and the count, this is what the world says. Well, the EU, basically their media, their government, and everything, they tell their people that China's population is between 1.41 and 1.43 billion people. The UN uses basically China's number, which is 1.416 billion. For whatever reason, the US says it's 1.413 billion. Russia, interesting, says that there's 1.416 billion, but they definitely put an asterisk on theirs. Japan says 1.4. So that's kind of what the world says. Now, China hasn't really released their 2024 yet, but they say that at the end of 2023, it was 1.409 billion. And they essentially say that the WHO has got their total at 1.416.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what the world says. How many people and what China says. Now, can we really trust China, right? And counting people and censuses are done differently in every country, and they're very different. And when we see China, we think of this. We think of large cities and large populations and huddled masses and big groups and this kind of thing.
Human trafficking.
Human trafficking. We think of all kinds
Slave
of
labor. Yeah.
right. Yeah, factories full of people and lots of factories and shipping. And then we hear these stories about these ghost cities, right?
Yeah.
And then there was some little bit of propaganda that came out that the population of these so-called ghost cities is starting to increase. And then others were saying, well, no, I think because of the real estate thing, people were moving people from, other cities or rural areas into these ghost cities. And some of it was mandatory by the government. They wanted less people in the rural areas to move into these empty cities. And they, and there you go. We got all kinds of ideas coming out of what people think of when they.
You're going right where we're going, JB.
Yep. JB's ahead of the curve as always. So, that's kind of what has been going on. And now let's kind of fast forward just a little bit and look at Beijing 2019. Lots of people and kind of in the market. In 2024, there's a lot less people. And the airports tend to be a little bit less crowded, the streets, less traffic. The malls have stores that are closed down and a lot less people. In their big holiday, where it's kind of like their Thanksgiving, New Year's, and Christmas. It's on kind of all rolled up to one, and everyone, does their migration, shall we say, internally back to their home or to see their relatives, kind of like how we spend our Thanksgiving. We tend to, join up with our family. And people are saying in China that it's just been a lot less people that go to these resort towns or come home and shop or do whatever. So you're starting to see images coming out of China where these malls are pretty dead and empty, or there's these big stores and there's hardly anybody there, or the markets on the street and there's very few people in the street buying in the markets. And I don't know if you've heard about this, Lisa, but that's been somewhat of a common theme that's kind of getting leaked out or people are talking about, especially people that don't live in China anymore, but still have contacts with their family and friends,
Now,
or businesses in
is
China.
this just in the larger cities? Because we are seeing a trend globally of people leaving the big cities after these, intense infiltrations of whether it's, other, um, violent infiltration.
Great point. Great question.
Is it just
Um,
cities?
and it's actually from everything I've read and
Okay.
what I'm hearing as far as reports is that it's almost just the opposite.
Oh,
There was I'll call it, boy, I don't know what to call it, a prefecture, shall we say, a region, a district within
okay.
China. And there were something like 13 villages, but only very few people were still left in these villages. And it was being very difficult for they said, to manage, and it was a lot of elderly people left in these villages. So they said, we're going to consolidate this and we're going to move these people out of these villages and into a more central location so they have access to better health care and food and all these, and voting or whatever governmental services and these kinds of things for the betterment of the people.
They're
We're
always.
going to consolidate those people out of those regional, villages and rural areas and move them into a not a big city, but a smaller city that's somewhat close to where they live. Um, and
Like
that
something
was what they're
15
trying to
minutes away or something.
do. Yeah.
Something
Leave
like
your childhood family home that you were born in and raised in and inherited from your great grandparents. Forget all that. Just we're now moving you over here into this apartment. You had 1,200 feet there. Well, you're going to have a 1,200-foot apartment on the 18th floor. Oh, lucky you. So
that.
anyway, that's what we're hearing is a trend in China. So now you see these images of China where it's kind of more of a not just a ghost city, but like I don't know if you can see the image to the right, up top right corner, you
Mhm.
know, there are basically no cars. And that bottom middle picture where the bridge is going over the river, there's very few cars on that highway there. And look at all those apartment buildings. Kind of strange, right?
That
Same
is
with the
very
bottom
strange.
right corner. So this is going beyond just ghost cities. Now, we all know that in China, everyone puts their money as their nest egg into real estate. And we've seen a real estate boom and crash in China. And a crash is probably an understatement. Um, there are so many rental properties available for people to buy or home, and it's just China. Population myth. That's good.
Sorry.
So no, it's good. So what we have here is we have um, an overabundance of too many people building too many homes or investing in real estate and not enough people to fill these homes.
Okay.
And that's what people are saying. That's why all these ghost cities exist. And that the government was feeding the people, yes, buy real estate, invest in real estate. It's a good thing to do. And it's spurring additional growth. And now they've just way overbuilt too many residential
Mhm.
buildings for the population. Well, ah, here's the big shocker.
Okay.
What is the population of China? Now, this is for all of you, you're going to, this is going to blow you away because I bet most of you have never heard this. What if I told you that the population of China is 400 to 500 million people. That's it.
Wow. Well, I mean, I think that America is closer to 250 million.
Well, it's possible.
So,
So let's talk about this.
wow, that's
What,
less than half, a third,
yes,
right?
a third.
A third.
So the world has been saying and going along with China's growth population, or China's annual growth rate,
And then
and
there's,
what it's gone through into a point that, oh yeah, China just crossed 1 billion people. I remember that, watching that on the news. Wow, the first country to have 1 billion people. And it kept growing, 1.1 billion, and look at India, it's catching up to China. India is going to have 1 billion people pretty soon. Whoa, China's at 1.3 billion now. And it continues on and on and on. And you start looking at these demographics. You're looking at the growth of new births, the fertility rate, and you look at how the population is getting older, and they're not dying young as they used to. And so with that will kind of signal to, yeah, that expands the population growth and fills up those numbers. But Lisa, and for those watching, what if I told you the idea and the concept that China had 1.4 billion people has always been a myth? It never hit that amount. It may have crossed 1 billion people, or it may never have crossed 1 billion people. That they sold us down the river what this total China population was going to be. What if I'm telling you that the COVID, pre-COVID, maybe their population was at 900 billion or 850 million? I'm sorry, 900 million or 850 million people. In other words, in 2019.
that would
That,
mean that the WEF got out of control because, so I was just listening on the way home today,
mhm,
and one of these things I was listening to was talking about on the Georgia Guidestones, which were, of course, imploded a few years ago. One of the 10 points of the uh, evil people that created those, one of their messages, it's a satanic thing
mhm,
of how to control all of us and whatever. It talks about that one of the messages were called for maintaining the global population under 500 million, the global population.
yes,
So if
yes.
they ever were 4 to 500 million people, the Chinese in themselves exceeded. That means that the dark ones, whatever you want to call it, they lost control of population um,
Mhm.
a long time ago.
There are researchers that are in Japan and that are in Russia who collaborate and say, like, there's some people in Russia that say that China actually only has somewhere between 500 and 690 million people
Mm.
um, today. And in Japan, there's people that say 400 million people to 600 million, somewhere in that neighborhood. Um, and there's all kinds of ways to measure populations from a
Okay.
distance without trusting the government numbers. But really, it comes all down to, there's, what do they say? There's lies, damn lies, and then there's statistics. And then there's lies, damn lies, and then there's government lies. And that's what we have here. We have a myth that China wants the world to think that they are massive in size and have this many people, because why? Well, their army must be massive too. That's a way of defense. Well, you can't take over China. Look how many billion there's, they got over 1 billion people there, you know,
That's
all
a
these things.
Genghis Khan strategy. One of his war tactics was to go out, because typically army groups were groups of 10 men, and so the night before they would go and they'd have their fires, and so before they would even wake up, a lot of times his opponents would capitulate or submit in the morning, because they looked out, and they what he would do is he would break up his groups, and he would
Yes,
have each man go start a fire. And
yes.
so it looked like he had 10 times the army. And just for that sheer fact of numbers, they would they would submit themselves to him before the war ever happened. So the numbers game is a thing, and you could apply that to and I don't want to jump too far ahead, but I've been screaming about the census here in America for years, and I think that the way they gentrify the areas and rewrite and make um, the count, they don't even use counties anymore. I don't know, that they make the little shapes to include certain areas to try to say there's more numbers in this district or that district to give more seats in Congress, that for people that may or may not exist.
Exactly.
And that is a manipulation of power.
Right.
So I don't want to get off topic.
You're nailing it, because that's exactly what a larger population kind of boasts to the world.
Right.
It's a defense, mechanism. And by the way, the idea of the fires, George Washington used that very technique across one of the rivers, so the British would think there were more people there, so that his army could sneak out and sneak north to attack from a different angle. So even Washington used that angle. So next, I'm going to let me stop sharing this, and I want to share another video, and I hope where'd it go? Where'd it go? Bear with me. Sorry, folks.
No, you're good. You're good. Just while you're doing that, I got my Judy Shelton Money Meltdown book, and I will tell everyone that, I can see his face. Mike, the money guy, Mike.
Mike Malone, or no, Mike? Which
Yes,
one is he?
Maloney. Yes.
Mike Maloney.
Yes.
There you go.
He was talking about the Mar-a-Lago Accords today, and I was like, "Oh, my friend IM told me about that a few months ago." So you guys go back. You can go in my channel, and there's a way to search and look up Mike Maloney. Thank you, Mom. Mike Maloney, or not Mike Maloney. Don't look up Mike Maloney. I didn't do an interview with Mike. Look up interviews with IM and look up the Mar-a-Lago Accords, and it talks about bringing us back to a gold standard or revaluing gold to pay off the debt.
And dollar devaluation, tariffs, everything. Yep.
And in this book on page 117, 30 years ago, Judy Shelton wrote about America First.
Oh, wow. Wow.
I'm not kidding. The movie is so crazy. Anyway, I can't wait to read this. Cannot wait. So that's what I'll be doing tonight.
Okay, so I have it here. Let's hope
here we go. Okay.
It's a 30-minute short. And by the way, I recommend you take a look at this. Her name is Leah's Real Talk. She's Chinese, and her research has been spot on, and she's got all kinds of contacts within China. Of course, she's Chinese and speaks Chinese, and she is even more grim than I am. I think she says that the Chinese population could be even 300 million.
Wow.
So let's listen to what she says here for this 1 minute, and explains to you that China never hit 1.4 billion, but actually pre-COVID we're at 800 million. And she uses the birth rates in India and China and the death rates in India and China for that comparison. So watch this, or listen to this.
Oh, I can't hear it.
Okay. Let's see. How do we do this, Lisa?
Do you have
settings?
The volume? If you can't do it, then send it to me in private chat and I'll play it on my end. Sometimes that changes the volume.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because I could hear it, but I didn't know. I sent it to you in the private chat. My apologies, people.
No.
If I would skip over this, but her math and her graphics here are phenomenal for 30 seconds.
Okay. Can you guys see that?
Yes.
On a white background? Okay. I'm going to hit it. Oh, no.
Hi, everyone.
no.
Welcome to
Pause
Liz
it.
Will Talk.
No.
Good morning, good afternoon,
China
and
doesn't
good
actually
evening.
have 1.4 billion people, and we can prove it with simple math. In 1990, India had 900 million people, while China had 1.1 billion, 110 million more. Over the past 30 years, India's fertility rate has averaged above 3, while China's has been below 1.1. After 30 years, high fertility rate made India a young country with an average age of 17, while China's one-child policy aged its population to an average age of 38. Yet in 2020, China's population is still reported as 30 million more than India's, which just doesn't add up. Plus, China is hiding population losses from COVID, which has been significant. It has even led to the closure of 20,000 kindergartens in the past 2 years. Watch my full program to get more details and subscribe for more. China doesn't actually have 1.4 billion people, and we can prove it with simple math. In 1990, India had...
Wow. That's impressive.
Isn't that crazy?
And then this is her full video, I guess, where she goes
Yeah,
into
that's her full video.
for an hour. That's awesome.
So I'm going to go back to my presentation here.
Okay.
Wow.
Technology. I've seen that before, though, where they've talked about how young India is, young of a country because of China's one-child policy that has made them an aged country, and how that's going to affect them also with their workforce going forward. So
That's correct. And as a matter of fact, so what we have here is we have China having a 1.4 billion myth. We have to go all the way back to, let's say, World War II or 1950. And when we start looking at the initial, that 1950 supposedly, and during that time, China was such a backward rural country, with no technology, that even counting back then was difficult. And of course, on paper. And the starting number of, say, 300 million back then might have been overstated, because they actually said, I think maybe it was even closer to 400 million. And when you have a starting number that's that inaccurate, and then you keep growing it, then what happens is governments come in, and they're certainly corrupt, and they kind of hide a collapse. Because if you are the mayor of a town or a village, and you're going to get so much money from the CCP per person, you don't want that number to be show that it's decreasing, because you're going to get less money. And my goodness, you got to fix, the road, or you got to have more money for the hospital, or more money for whatever project in your town or community. And so if the number is overstated, you're going to get more money. If you report less deaths, then you're going to get more money. You follow? And
it's the same reason that allegedly children go unreported in some cultures.
Right. Then it gets even deeper, because what happens is now China realizes, or at the top, the information that they're feeding is bad information. And now, remember, they had this huge famine because communism, Mao went in there, and millions and millions of people died. Some would say 80 million people died. And so that took the population down significantly. And it took, decades for that population to come back, because the people who starved were young and old. It wasn't just the old. It wasn't just the those with pre-existing conditions, let's say. So you have a starting number that's probably wrong, And if you use that starting number, maybe you could say you could get to 1.4 billion. Or if China didn't want the world to know and they hid it, how many people were actually dying from the famine under Mao, then, and it wasn't just a famine, it was state controlled problem or inflicted on its population. A lot of people were lost. Well, they don't want to tell the world how many people died during that time frame. They want the world to think that communism is wonderful, it's great. So they're going to hide that number, which would also mean that the number from after that point and that recovery point, that's another reason why China never hits the 1.4 billion in population. It's a myth. So this completely reshapes China. So even at the top, they're getting information that they got this amazing growth rate, 3 children per household, or 3.5, and they're going to go through another famine. So what do? They create, all right, we're going to bring it down to 2. And most Americans don't know this. CCP moved it down to 2 children per household, and they were still getting bad numbers from the villages and the cities. So then they dramatically went down to 1 child per household, or 1 child policy. And we all know about the 1 child policy, but we don't realize that it went from 3 plus to 2 to 1. So then the information is still bad that's flowing to the top, because that's where they get their money. And they overextend the 1 child policy too long. So now they have an upside down, where they have an aged population, and there's 1 worker for every worker who has aged, or 1 worker for non-worker, versus you're supposed to have multiple workers for all those who, let's say you want 3 or 4 workers for 1 non-worker. Well, now China's 1-to-1. So they can't maintain their economy. They can't maintain their size. They got this real estate money pumping machine, which is pumping in to build more real estate when the population isn't there because it's overstated. Even the Chinese people believe that they have 1.4 billion people in their country, because that's what the government tells them and tells the world. So now you kind of know why it reshapes China.
Okay, I have a question for you. Could it also be on purpose or calculated to benefit financially through, they were always saying like China's an underdeveloped country. And so they would get money from, I think it was NATO or NAFTA, some of those deals. But the US was always paying in, because supposedly we weren't underdeveloped. But it was like, well, why is China? But China was supposedly underdeveloped. Was that because of their fake numbers of people versus their GDP?
Yes, a little bit of both. What you have
that's also a motivation to inflate your
GDP,
numbers.
Every country lies about the currency, and every country lies about their employment. Every country lies about their GDP. Just like China, as I'm proposing here, is that China is lying about their total population because it's a defense mechanism. It shows the world how big and mighty they are, and why they have these tremendous built cities, et cetera, et cetera. So it's propagating the lie, Lisa, and it's also trying to justify their GDP, or justify to the World Bank or the World Trade Organization, oh, we need more loans to come to China because we're growing so fast. And look at our rural area. It's just so old, and it needs more money to build its infrastructure up. So we're still a 3rd world country in the rural areas. Our cities are magnificent, but our rural areas are so poor, and we need your help. And that's kind of where it goes. So what we see is we have cities, major cities, Shanghai, Beijing and stuff, where their apartment buildings or their residential buildings have like a 20% occupancy, or commercial buildings have a 20% occupancy. Traffic is only 30% of what it is now versus pre-COVID. Their Lunar New Year, they said that travel was down by 80%. Some said vendors are completely gone. They just couldn't make it anymore. Shanghai used to be the bustle and now that's faded. And even the crowded streets of Beijing or their new, beautiful, huge, airport is nothing. It's practically empty. So we have empty streets throughout China. Now, this is where it gets a little darker. In the last 10 years, crematoriums. Now, China tends to cremate their those who have died, and in the last 10 years, they've had about a 13% death increase. And now, this is according to the government. All right, but they built in the last 10 years 18% more crematoriums. Well, why did they do that? Because the crematoriums were supposedly keeping up with the death rate. However, in the last 10 years, their crematorium spending by the government for adding new crematoriums, building larger infrastructure within an existing one, etc., that spending went up 175% in 10 years. So if the death rate only increased by 13%, why did the spending go up by 175%? That's a big tell right there.
Yeah.
That tells you a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So pre-COVID, I'm suggesting, like others have, from what I've been reading and gathering information, says that they may have peaked their population at 850 million people.
Mm.
That was pre-COVID. But what if the deaths were hidden? What if, I don't know if you recall, and I think Radar New Jersey mentioned it, something about the cell phones. Remember when all the cell phones went dead in China during COVID? There's like over 1 million cell phones or 2 million cell phones. But then there's like, quiet, no, don't talk about that. That was a lot of deaths, where they were originally reported practically none. And this is a big part. The WHO was where the world was going to for information on the death rate, and the WHO was reporting to World Meter the death rates by country. And I was glued to that during that time. I was watching those charts because I was trying to get a feel for what it was like in other countries. And but China was kind of hiding it. And where does China controls the WHO? Why would they control the WHO? Because they want to hide their death rate from COVID. They want to hide their total death rate. They want to hide their population. They want to feed bogus information into World Meter, which gets their information from the WHO. So China, I'm proposing, if it's not 1.4 billion, but it's way down to maybe 400 million, then China went from giant to just basically a shadow, and its might really fades. It doesn't have it's really more of a paper tiger than a real tiger anymore. And if I were China and I saw Biden over there, Biden administration says, well, we cut a deal with China so they wouldn't invade Taiwan, and we showed our strength. Well, maybe China didn't have the military might and muscle to really go after Taiwan because they didn't have the population anyway.
Mm.
It's possible.
That's possible.
So that's where their might fades.
Wow.
And it makes Biden look good. It makes China like, well, see, we're not going to really go invade. Taiwan's ours, but we're just not going to send our troops over there yet. So could
China have been a money laundering thing just like Ukraine? It was my understanding, like Tucker was on with Alex Jones yesterday or a few days ago. If you guys haven't seen that, I highly recommend it.
Good.
Tucker is straight out saying, and he did another one with a architect from they're talking about the 9/11, that they were controlled demolition, three buildings. One of them didn't have a plane run into it, and all the things, and they're silencing the firemen, all these things. But Tucker and Alex Jones were talking about how, all the things happening around 9/11. And I know from doing my own research that Giuliani was in charge of the haul off, the cleanup out of 9/11, and supposedly there was a lot of metal, possibly precious metals under 9/11, and that was sent to China, and as part of some kind of payoff scheme or whatever, and the Clintons may or may not have been involved with that. So is it that it wasn't this country that we thought it was all the time, and maybe it was more similar to a Ukraine that we're now we're learning the story of what's happening in Ukraine, because that's really what happened in China all those years ago.
It's possible. It's possible. Obviously, the economic engine that we had from our manufacturing, it was the sucking sound from our country and our Rust Belt over to China.
Yeah.
And then the profits were supposed to come back to the U.S., but Congress wanted to tax the corporations, so some of the money didn't really come back. It went elsewhere to take advantage of other, investment opportunities, and it expanded in China or expanded in India or wherever, Vietnam or wherever, and wherever it was a lower tax rate, that's where the corporate money went to. It didn't really get onshore. Now, every once in a while, we would do these special deals. Well, onshore today and get a lower tax rate. It's kind of like, buy here from a car from me today, and I'll save you money with 4 new tires and blah, blah, blah. Congress was trying to do that to try to woo some of that money back to the U.S. From corporations that left offshore. That wasn't the plan. There's like, oh my gosh, corporations are doing this. They took their jobs, but the profits are supposed to come back. Well, some of the profits came back to their executives, but the people that were actually manufacturing were gone. So China became a massive factory production machine for the world, and still is that today. But it just has a lot fewer people than we ever thought, and they could still do that with less people.
Okay.
And they needed that sucking sound. If they had less population than what we thought they had, then they're going to suck all the people out of the rural areas to go work in their factories and promise them this and that and the other thing to keep that machine going for the world. Because the CCP, let's face it, they're pocketing that money just like our politicians pocket that money.
Yeah, it's only the
so China's covering up their deaths. Then this is, like I said, why does China control the WHO? Well, we know it's to maintain the myth of the 1.4 billion. Now, this is where we're going to go dark. This is dark info. So warning. Just woo-woo thought here. Crazy thought. Let's hope that this isn't true. This is going to be really sick. What if I told you that Dr. Fauci is a war hero? What if I told you that the virus, the COVID virus, there's been hints that it actually came from a lab in the Carolinas, and a Chinese scientist took parts of that and went to Canada and then ended up to China. We don't know where she went from China from there. And what if it was a U.S. weapon that they knew it was going to Wuhan, and they knew it would be accidentally, with parentheses.
Then that would be against the Geneva Convention.
It certainly
That's
would.
Biological warfare, and that's disgusting.
It is.
I don't think the American people would be behind that.
No. The American people aren't. They're certainly not. The American people were not behind the Tuskegee. They were not about the all the other evils. They weren't. The American people weren't about the assassination of JFK by our own government. They weren't supporting the 9/11, the USS Liberty. There's a lot that the U.S. population isn't for, but that doesn't say that the evils of government wouldn't, or the industrial weapons complex, I'll call it, didn't cause a U.S. strike. Or was it just a nature spark, Lisa? Was Chinese DNA actually targeted so that they had a larger hit to their population from COVID than we did? Because it was all silent out of China. The last thing that China wants to do is start saying, wow, we lost 300, 400 million people here in China from COVID. Because what does that do to their myth? And then it exposes their myth, which is part of their defense. Well, we got a billion man army or whatever, you know what I mean?
Mm.
So they're not going to want to release that information. They're going to try to maintain that myth. So what if it was we know that they were trying to create DNA biological weapons in Ukraine that targeted Russian DNA. We know this. Who's to say that our labs weren't trying to do this as we're just going to put this biological weapon over here in safekeeping in case a war broke out with China, we could use it. And maybe it was released. This is dark woo-woo and dark ugliness.
Mm-hmm.
But it becomes not just a weapon on the people and the loss of life, but it becomes a financial weapon to China. It becomes a political weapon to China, and it keeps China in check. It keeps China from annexing Taiwan or bringing Taiwan back into its flock, however you want to call it from world history. So it is dark. It's more of a Cold War virus plot. And I give it, I don't give it a 0% chance that this is true. And I don't give it a 50% chance either. I don't know what percentage I can give it, but I certainly can't say it's zero. There's some pretty strong evidence that part of this virus actually was worked up within our own government and not from the Chinese government.
And to target Asian descent specifically.
It's very possible.
DNA.
Very possible.
That's very
But
interesting.
it certainly creates a smaller China, which changes I'm going to call it the New World Order. The order of things is, well, China's the manufacturing arm for the world, and America is the reserve currency, and Saudi Arabia is the oil, the Arab states of the oil, and, I don't know what Europe is. They're gone. I don't know what Canada is. It's dead. It's done. But it changes everything, and it's almost like a first strike nuclear weapon, but it's hidden. It's quiet. It's like, oh, it just came out of nature, or oops, it was a lab leak. God knows what. If our CIA was willing to overthrow governments around the world and did so, and some at the request of a president and some not by the request of a president, just a military industrial complex. We went into Iraq and killed how many people looking for weapons of mass destruction? If we could do that, who's to say that we couldn't do this to China?
How many civilians did Obama drone bomb?
Exactly. It goes on and on and on.
They're not above it, for sure.
And it doesn't require a presidential signature or order. And what president would do that and put their name on it? It would be the China final solution, basically. So these ghost cities make China into becoming almost a ghost nation. If it comes out that it's true that China has only a population of 300, 400, 500 million people, 600 million people, and not 1.4 billion people, then the rest of the world is going to say, oh, well, that explains it. That explains this and this and this, A, B, C, and D. It's real simple, X plus Y equals Z. Well, you got X fertility and you got Y death rate and you equals Z, the total population, So the numbers don't add up. When you look at India and their population rate of growth, and you look at China's rate of growth, then the starting number was wrong, or the death toll is wrong, or all of the above. And I really don't know what to say, but China is in a world of hurt. Even if we accept the 1.4 billion people, they have an aged population. Their population is too old. They have one worker for every non-worker, and a country is not going to be able to survive. And they had the one child population go too far, too long. But here's the next one. The reporting, even if the central government was trying to do what's best for China, the reporting up to the central government, because people meant money flowing back, then the people were overreported because the deaths were underreported or the births were overreported or both. And so now China is where it's facing what European nations are facing. There aren't enough Italians being born to maintain Italy. Certainly there's enough migrants, I'll use the word migrant, into Italy to maintain Italy's population, but they're not Italian.
Or
The
what's
same with
happening in
Germany.
Ireland. They're losing their
Ireland,
culture completely.
exactly.
The number one male name, birth name is Mohammed, not Sean or Patrick,
So
or anything you would think. Yeah.
if we start seeing China open up their immigration to say India and say, come on, come over here, India, and try to fix this demographic crisis, then we also will know that the 1.4 billion population number is truly a myth. That's how China is got to fix its demographics. It's got to bring new people, new young men who can work in these factories and young women who can work in these factories and start, hopefully, fingers crossed, assimilate into the Chinese culture. That's America does not have the proper birth rate to maintain its American culture either. Our demographic isn't as bad as China, and Japan's is really bad. Japan's just not going to exist. Demographics are falling off the cliff. They don't have the childbirth, and they don't have the young that's having children, and they don't even have enough young to have children in Japan.
And
So
I thought they were skewed more. I'm surprised to see this so balanced because I thought they were skewed more towards male in the Chinese culture because of
they are. This is a projection for 2034. This isn't the
Oh,
current.
okay. I'm
This
sorry.
is 10 years from now.
Okay.
So it's going to skew a little bit better by 2034, but it's not good enough to maintain it's not good enough to maintain the world's economic engine as the world's manufacturing base. So the tariffs by Trump and Trump attacking China financially with the tariffs and manufacturing base, et cetera, is because he sees or his advisors see China's demographics failing and not going to be able to keep up with
And knows it's
the
not sustainable.
manufacturing anyway.
Yeah. Well, even in their current situation, just the fact that their overproduction by not exporting is going to stifle their economy because they're going to have over $1 trillion of product that they can't export.
Right.
They're not consumers. So
that's right. There are factories in China that are have raw materials that are parked, raw materials that are partially made into new products, and new products that are made without a cell that are just sitting stagnant. And there are people that don't come to work because I don't have a sale for the product. I have enough raw materials, I have partials, and I have full, but these companies don't know what to do. We don't know if this is temporary or not, but they know that we as Americans are the largest consumer.
Right.
Now,
But our plastic goes to them to be processed into those little beads to be able to create new things.
that's right.
And then today, I don't know if it was today or yesterday, I heard Trump talking about how there was going to be possibly some changes in the auto tariffs because of this part kind of shortage, or that it would take time to kind of, gear up or get people to be able to scale to be able to build certain parts here. And so he was thinking of, I guess, kind of backing off possibly I didn't hear the exact words, but he didn't say backing off is what I'm saying. But that was the gist that I was getting of what he was saying. Like, well, there's going to be these parts and they're harder to get. And so it makes me wonder, like, where is all this stuff going to land? Who's going to be, it's like a hot potato game,
It is.
you know?
It really is just that. It's a hot potato. So, Lisa, I honestly don't know. I just know that China, being the economic engine that we think it is from a manufacturing standpoint, even if it's got 1.4 billion people, its demographics need to change, which means they're going to have to import more people to be able to work in these factories. Their people are living older and living longer, and they could change the retirement age. Remember, their retirement age, if you're in China, you have to work, not because you want to, but you have to work because it's a requirement. It's a communist country. It's, you could get a pension. You don't get your pension until you hit a certain age. Well, they could raise it, but they are obviously are on a tightrope. They don't want the people to rise up too much and start rioting. And they're in a world of hurt financially from the tariffs. They're a world of hurt financially because I don't think they have the population to maintain their position in the world. There's a lot to unpack here, and there's a lot to think how this is going to play out in the long run. But that's why. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. How do you think AI and robotics could play into that? Could that help them with the longevity of being able to continue manufacturing? Or do you think that the tariffs will move manufacturing more so quickly that it won't matter? It will pull it out of their markets.
Robotics isn't quite there from the perspective of the smaller things that we think of, but It's coming. It's right around the corner. The idea that, some of us are going to be able to afford a $15,000 robot and put it in our home. It's going to do our dishes, maybe even cook, mow the lawn, do the cleaning, the majority of the cleaning, and these kinds of things. That's coming. And that's going to be helpful, or you're going to be able to buy multiples and rent them out to other people that can't afford the $15,000 or $20,000 price tag. But as they become rolled out, they're going to become cheaper and cheaper. So the robots that are being able to do these fine tasks with AI plugged into their brain to be able to figure out, oh, I need to lightly pick up these headphones and slightly and set them down gently over here. Mm-hmm. That technology exists, but it's expensive, and the AI doesn't know. But now you can program the AI and say, these go here, and that's where they belong. So mm-hmm. The AI is walking through the room. The AI robot's walking through the room and grabs them and puts them away for you. Keeps your room nice and tidy, or your house tidy and stuff, that kind of thing. So I think that's what's going to happen. And that also means that manufacturing coming back to the US, a lot of those jobs are just going to be replaced by robots. Mm-hmm. I want to do a future video for us and research this, because I don't know the way out. I hate UBI, Universal Basic Income. So I don't know, but we're going to have to think of something. Money is a debt instrument in this country. So, and it brings us to slavery. But long story short,
money is slavery. That's the whole thing. Like I need to do the presentation that I did in Canada and walk through that. And especially now that I did it one time, and now all the things I messed up on, I can go back and correct. And do it for the show, because I really had some enlightenment doing my research for that, and really, to me, it goes all the way back to when they created the constitutional dollar. Why were they even doing that? Well, they needed to create an instrument that we could barter with. But that wasn't the value. So if you have a scale, I wish we have a scale at the store. I should have brought the scale home because it's such a great visual representation. They just needed something that we would all agree with that was the shiny rock over here. And we all agreed what the value was of this shiny rock that goes over here on this side of the scale. And then from there, we could all decide, oh, I'm going to put 3 tomatoes over here. I'm going to put 2 eggs over here, whatever. And that was what, and then the problem with it was that this shiny rock, we didn't take from the earth or someplace that was decentralized. We let a private entity control this shiny rock and make it into a debt instrument, like you're saying, and let it be centralized. And that's when we became slaves, because then we kept taking our eggs and our tomatoes and our chickens, our energy, our work effort, and putting it into the debt instrument that they controlled. And that created human trafficking. It's trafficking our energy. It is a slavery system. And that's where I just was like, once I kind of unpacked it for myself, trying to explain why crypto and why it's so important to hold assets in your own possession. And we live in this digital world and blah, I'm a digital girl in a digital world and blah, and all this. And then I was like, doing the history on it, I was like, any form of money is slavery. Any form that you cannot hold in your own possession and barter with peer-to-peer in private.
I agree.
Anyway, sorry, I get so pissed off about it.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's good, Lisa. It's crazy to think, though, that China only has maybe 400, 500 million people.
That is wild to think.
Slightly more than us. Or if we are 250 or whatever, like you said, then just double our population. Which brings to the last point I'd like to make here, without, I'm not sharing a screen thing here, but the last point I'd like to make is, if the people of China, you take out the government, the CCP off the top, and the people of Taiwan, you take their government out, would the people of China say, let's go over there and take over that island? They're our people too, and we need to be one. Or are they going to say, no, you know what? I'm too busy just making food or providing for my family, or I want to go, visit other family in another town, or just my day-to-day routine. I don't have time to waste with that whole Taiwan thing. And the same with the Taiwanese. And for us as Americans, when we say, well, we got to strike back at China, or they take Taiwan, we're going to go over there and we're going to send our military over there. Well, we as Americans, I think the majority of us, if it was put up for a vote, or if we had to back it with war bonds and not through money printing, then we would say, we got enough problems right here in America. We don't need to worry about Taiwan. And guess what? Taiwan, China, that conflict or potential conflict probably wouldn't even happen if those governments weren't involved, if government wasn't involved, if just the people were talking with the people directly or indirectly. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So if China is the paper tiger, like I'm describing here, because of a lower population number, then we have less to worry about with China. Recently, we found out some of their jets were just blown up balloons and not real, or plastic sheet metal aluminum and not real jets. Just like what we did in World War II to fake out the Germans, thinking we were going to invade France from a different position.
Afghanistan. Yeah.
So it goes on to say that I think the real number in China will probably come out eventually, and a lot of people are going to be shaken by that number. And now you've been prepared. So thank you, Lisa, for letting me bloviate about that. I've been counting people, Lisa. I've been counting them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Yeah, your pencil is sharp. I'm curious, like, what you think the result, like, when and if this information comes out, if it's accurate and if this comes out, Like, because when you're saying that to me, like my knee jerk thing was, disgust, that we would be somehow involved with it, and or an anger, and once again a feeling of betrayal that, like, wait, what are we doing to people in the rest of the world without we the people's consent? Or like you said, we didn't buy a war bond and say, yeah, let's go infect China and diminish their population. Like, what do you think, if that were to come out, if that was true, allegedly, and if that were to come out, do you think it would make a difference? Would people care?
I think that information probably will never come out, at least in our lifetimes. And I hope not, because if they found out that it originated here in the US,
Mhm.
I think the world would say, it's time to get rid of the US.
Mhm.
And even though I wouldn't, and you wouldn't, and those watching this wouldn't support those actions by our government, nonetheless, we voted for these people, or we allowed this to happen on our watch, even if we weren't watching. And so therefore we have maybe some responsibility, is how the world might see it, and they'd want to take drastic action.
Oh.
However, having said that, China wouldn't do it to its own population because, one, they know that they got a myth here. They got a 1.4 billion myth that they're trying to keep.
Mhm.
They don't want to destroy their own population like that. They also have a demographic problem, which the world knows and can
Right.
see.
And it benefits them to keep up the myth.
And it benefits them to grow their population. So it's the last thing that they would want. Now, I would think that because this information is in some researchers in Russia, in Japan, there's the lady that I presented here on the show, Leah Talks, I think is her video channel. After the show's over, I'll post
LEI
it.
talks. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's others that are reporting this, and there are people within China saying, where are the people? Where are the people? Look at this. And there's countless videos now of people walking down streets and businesses boarded up and closed, and people are gone. And it's not because they've moved to another new city. It's in a new city. It was a hustle and bustle. It was a marketplace full of people, and the numbers just keep dwindling and dwindling and dwindling. And if there is such thing as long COVID, or COVID creates, turbo cancers, well, what's the cancer rate in China? Well, China's
Oh
not
my
going to tell us that number. And
Yeah.
maybe it's even worse than we thought.
So it
in
could be
China.
getting exponential at this point. I know before we got
Or
started,
bird flu.
oh yeah, I told you about, I love watching travel documentaries and whatever. And I had, I don't know if it was just a short video or whatever, but this young guy was on there and he's like, this is the weirdest thing, but I'm in this city, and he was somewhere in China or whatever. And he's like, I'm in one of these like paper cities or ghost cities. And he said, I'm in a building made for 10,000 people, and there are 3 of us staying here. And he's like, it is the most eerie thing. And he's showing video around the whole city. There's no cars anywhere. The city is eerily quiet. And he like goes out and swims in this giant high-rise building, literally made for 10,000 people. So then at night he leaves the light on in his apartment that he's staying in. And he goes out and he's like, looks up at this giant building, and he's like, see that one light? That's my apartment. It was crazy to think about. A building for 10,000 people, and there's 3 people staying there.
Makes sense, doesn't it?
It does. I mean, you're seeing, and the fact that you're seeing it in, oh, we sold something. You're seeing it in multiple, cross-referenced, you know what I mean? So you're seeing it in travel blogs. You're seeing it in, this lady talking about it. You're watching the death rate and the cremation costs. And so there's all this cross-referencing of things that really bring validation to what you're saying. So It's
So watch for China bringing more people from India or other countries into their factories. That might be a tell.
interesting.
And then they'll, look what they're doing to the population in northwest China that is kind of the Uyghurs. I'm
Uyghurs.
sorry, I'm
Yeah.
with words and names like that. Yeah. Uh, wow, was that a mistake? Huh?
Yeah.
But they're Muslim, so they didn't want them. They didn't want that strong religious, culture within their country, but
Yeah.
yet they could use those people um, to in their factories. It's sad and tragic. It's ugly. It's another example of the evils of government, not just communism. Um, but wow, we have something here, don't we?
Yeah.
We
It's
definitely have
very
something.
interesting. Yeah. Things have changed, and hopefully things are changing now. And but it's up to us and
Yeah.
what the future looks like. And people like you, I am, and people like that we have in the chat are going to
Yes.
make the difference of which direction this goes. And
Right.
telling people about this, telling people to watch this video and engage your brain, as I say when I'm teaching my son, engage your brain, and paying attention to things, looking for multiple resources, cross-referencing, asking lots of questions. Like that's how we get out of these things. So, or
One more thing I forgot to mention.
a
Just
little.
another information.
Okay.
There is a person in the WHO, the World Health Organization, who is kind of being a whistleblower, who speaks Chinese and is posting information secretly about this China myth and about the deaths from COVID and that kind of thing, and how he's using, or I'm assuming it's a he, AI models from imports and exports into China and a variety of other things to validate the death rate and to validate the total population. So
Wow.
other people are being able to figure this out.
That's exciting too. Yeah. Everybody can do their part. Everybody can find their information. And like Radar says, fight, 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 and share, share, share. So thank you guys all for watching. We'll see you on WBRT on Thursday morning. Take care, guys.